Virtually every leader in the health freedom movement talks about the insecurity of the food supply as one of the primary avenues of tyranny. Our family has rigorously sourced our foods for over a decade, and one of our favorite sources is Farm Match. And specifically, if you are in San Diego, Real Food Club PMA. My kids are literally made from their maple breakfast sausage and the amazing carnitas we make from their pasture-raised pork. But from regeneratively raised raw dairy products to the organic potato chips made in regenerative lard, or anything you might get at your local farmer's market, our family's overall wellness and the security of our food lies in the hands of Farm Match and Real Food Club. I am so excited to be sharing about Farm Match and Real Food Club to offer Future Generations podcast listeners 10% off your first order. You can find the code and link in the show notes. Enjoy the rest of the show. Love and appreciate you all. The desire to go off-grid and disconnect from the system was one of the single most important initiatives any household could have. Whether it is growing our own food, becoming sovereign in our energy production and usage, establishing alternative communication strategies, or digging a well and finding the infinity of primary water. About a year and a half ago, our family moved into our new home in North County, San Diego on 3 acres of precious land here in America's finest county. One of the first things we did was hire Food Forest Abundance to design a regenerative layout for our land. From the different trees to plant differing berry guilds and synergistic pollinators, to consulting on alternative energy, collecting our rainwater, and even helping us find our local well guy, Food Forest Abundance and their Freedom Farm Academy has been pivotal in the gradual and consistent evolution of our household towards true sovereignty from the system. They have helped us simplify a very confusing process and helped us create the design of our dreams. It doesn't matter if you have 3 acres, dozens or hundreds, or just a small yard. Food Forest Abundance has something to offer you and your family in your journey to move your entire household off-grid. Use the code TheFutureGen to work with the absolute best in the world, Food Forest Abundance, to create your own freedom farm and get off-grid at a discounted rate. Welcome to another episode of the Future Generations podcast. This episode is part 2 of the episode with Hope Schachter, telling an autumn story about medical kidnapping. Episode 1 shook many of you at your core. I hope it did, because it should, because it is one of the single most radical vulnerabilities that we have in this society, especially those that want to preserve choice, especially those that care that those choices are in alignment with your values and not pharma and not the industry, especially when you may, God forbid, have an accident and have to go into the system to have to navigate things. If you haven't gone to Gail McRae's episode, if you haven't listened to Hope's first interview and you're just jumping in on this one, she does rehash a lot of things from a different lens. I had her very specifically talk through some key points, especially learning more about the CPS process and what they did to navigate it, especially about remnant healthcare and about having these amazing medical advocates supporting you through a journey. God forbid that you have to navigate one where you have to kind of deal with a lot of these very coercive recommendations by the system, but also to be able to translate if there is a medical necessity and if likely you just need some support for more education, for more informed consent, but also for, which most of us would actually want, is to stand your ground if you largely just never want the system in you or your children's bodies. But third, in really navigating how to prevent these types of things happening at all. A big thing for us that we talked about was how she would approach navigating the same situation, knowing what she knows now. And that was a really powerful thing, really to talk about paradigms of health, really to talk about different perspectives that would largely have helped her navigate even the question of whether to go into the system at all. And just so you know, to her credit, Hope is a nutritional therapy practitioner. She is a therapist. She is a very, very experienced mom in the world of medical and health freedom. She did everything that she could within her own arsenal to navigate everything that she needed to. And yet she is still humbling herself and learning way more than she would likely would have. And she's preparing herself, God forbid, anything like that happens again. This episode is one of the most important. It's one of the most powerful because in the end, Hope is a hero to me. Autumn is a hero to me. And these families that are the canaries in the coal mine, brave enough to tell their story and take a big stand for us, families who would very easily be in the same situation, my hat's off to you. I'm deeply honored and deeply grateful to have had the opportunity to interview Hope twice. And I hope that you check in with both episodes and you share them far and wide, because every family who believes what we believe needs to hear these vulnerabilities because they are real. They could happen to any of us at any moment. Any of our children could get caught in the mix. And when you hear the stories that Hope tells about what the system did to her daughter, it'll break your heart. And it should. And you should listen, and you should build in all the protective measures that you need to for your family, mentally, physically, and spiritually. Love and appreciate you all. Enjoy this episode. Welcome to the Future Generations podcast, providing you with the world-changing content necessary to inspire you, your family, and our planet to a life of optimal health potential. We'll help you make the choices that powerfully influence the lives you bring into this world. It's time to strengthen our resolve, do better now, and for our future generations. I'm your host, Dr. Stanton Hom. Okay, welcome to part two, an amazing part one interview that actually got cut short where I was staring off into the side. You guys aren't going to see this on the video, but Hope knows because we have kids that are the same age that there's no holding them back sometimes when they want to get to you. And so we had to abruptly stop the interview last time, and then also just kind of processing and realizing that this is such an important story that warrants 2 interviews, maybe 3, right? Depending on how far and where we go today. And we were just getting into Hope about how this problem isn't relegated to liberal states, not just California. And then also, just like you were actually qualifying, it's actually a type of hospital that made you guys a little bit more vulnerable, but then also you referred to another hospital thinking that would be a better thing, but teaching hospitals are going to be teaching hospitals. And so yes. I'd love to maybe pick up where we left off, and then we can go down some other routes as well.
Great. Yeah. Because I worked at a teaching hospital, I sort of knew. So when other people were bringing up UCSF Bunny off, I was like, that is a teaching hospital. And I can't remember if last time I said that, that it has nothing to do with where I live. That's not about California. That is actually a large majority of children's hospitals are teaching hospitals, that they are practicing on your children. And so I will come back to the CPS bit, but, throughout this whole process, my husband was, asking everyone who was kind of, coming in and out of the room, like, do you have children? And I may have said that last time that it was always kind of a response that no, I don't, because they're more compliant. And so I do think that the ability to practice on children, it probably goes much darker in terms of why that is, why the teaching hospitals, really tend to be, the children's hospitals are overwhelmingly teaching hospitals, which is not necessarily the case of all teaching hospitals. But if you're looking to get children's specific treatment, and that's why, I felt more comfortable at the local emergency room, because I knew that these people were specialists, that they were licensed, they were doctors. And if I was speaking with a specialist, they usually had many years under their belt, versus these teaching hospitals that don't. And that was, alarming to my husband. When it comes to Child Protective Services, we had been threatened originally with the court order over the direct donor blood, because they didn't want to give us the direct donor blood. They kept kind of pushing us off, and we were the ones who made that happen, who, they're getting to a point where they're saying that, this is life or death, but they're not willing to contact their own lab to say that getting my husband's blood is a life or death situation. My husband is the one who did that, and they were able to get it to us in less than 24 hours, where
right.
we had been there, or just around 24 hours. We had been there a week, close to a week. Probably about a handful of days when it started to get pushed by the court order. So, we felt relieved. We also had those organizations, I believe I've mentioned, Blessed by His Blood and Pure Blood Registry, so that we could connect with donors we felt comfortable with, because as I shared last time, it wasn't just about the COVID vaccine. You're talking about your child's body being filled with the fluid of someone that you may not know their lifestyle, if they drink or smoke or any of that.
All the other things.
Yeah. And so we'd had the court order threatened before, but the second time was in regard to them administering this diuretic without my consent, even though they woke me up for many other medications. And when I said that that was illegal, and I was going to be filing a grievance, is, when that ball got rolling, it was less than a day later that CPS showed up at the room. And, we had asked if we could have a lawyer present and speaking with them, and we were told no. And so we had asked if we could record the conversation, and we were told no. We had someone visiting for religious purposes to pray over Autumn, who had stayed in the room while they were there, and they brought in the doctors, which was hard to get a hold of because I had been trying to speak to the doctors since they administered a medication without my consent, and they weren't coming to the room. There was a period of time where we were in discussion with Remnant while CPS was in the room. CPS left the room while I was talking with the doctors and had Remnant on the phone because there were things that we were in compliance with. There are things that they had told me, would be an evolving conversation that they actually took into their own hands. So it really was a hostage situation. And I wasn't sure why CPS left the room. And then they came back and they told me that I could write out some of my issues with them. And they told me the specific things that the doctors were going to require of us that would need to be something that we would give a lot of thought to over the next day, and they would be checking in with us the next day. Some of those things included Keppra. I was told that because Autumn had a seizure, that she had this potential condition called press. Now, I wasn't concerned because I actually had a friend who had press while giving birth. It's where there's a lot of dilation and constriction of the blood vessels in the brain, in the back of the brain. And they told her it could be, a lifelong condition because she had this migraine, and she wound up being fine. After birth, it cleared up. And so I wasn't super concerned because the neurologist originally hadn't seemed concerned. Again, it was these ICU doctors who had really made this sound potentially terrifying. But that neurologist that had originally spoken with me also said, I want you to know that Keppra does carry a risk to the kidneys. That's something that you need to take into consideration. Now, the ICU doctors wouldn't come speak with me about it. They told CPS that I was refusing Keppra when actually I had been consulting with Remnant and outside pharmacists to find out if there were any other anti-seizure medications that would have less risk to the kidneys. And I wanted to specifically speak about a few of those options, but they would not come speak with me. And they told CPS I was refusing, which was not true. And so I tried to speak to that in the meeting where CPS was present with the doctors. And then, CPS leaves the room for whatever reason, which we later find out. As well as things like a PICC line when they had already just inserted the 3 new IVs. And I said, why would we do that? And the doctors are also refusing to test her sputum to see if she's developing a ventilator associated pneumonia. So they outline these things that we feel like we're being coerced to do, including the PICC line. which they came into the room, and Autumn had actually that night, when we're trying to go through these things, she developed a fever. So she was getting an infection. Now, in that CPS hearing where I had Remnant on the phone, the doctors are saying, well, we all carry bugs inside of us. And, we don't want to, find out if there's one. And then we're just giving unnecessary antibiotics, even though, at that point, I've been consulting with a pediatric respiratory therapist who was saying that based on her numbers, that she was basically breathing normal, like a normal air based on the settings. So the fact that she was on a ventilator was unnecessary and not warranted, but, they're playing chess. So, when they came to insert the PICC line, they told us that it was hospital policy not to, give a PICC line to a child with an active infection. And we had to sign paperwork that we would assume all liability for that.
Wow.
So these things were under coercion. I also had a resident that kept saying that, because we're kind of moving slowly on these diuretics up from the gentlest to potentially Lasix or Bumex. And I was told that the next one I was comfortable with was agreed upon with the doctors. I made her check multiple times. And yet the next morning I got a call from CPS. Now I'm up all night doing these things. Like the PICC line is a line that goes, we chose the leg because she had already had the neck catheter removed, because she couldn't, she was immobile with like an open wound on her neck. So we chose it to go from her leg up to her heart. Sorry, it's hard to.
It's okay. Sorry.
Yeah. Sorry, I'll try and keep together. It's just, to go back is hard. The next morning we had a call, that's saying that we are not in compliance, that, we had overnight to, write to CPS, although I am making medical decisions all night in regards to my daughter. I also have a newborn and a toddler. Like I cannot sit down and write them a letter. Yeah. They could speak to me, but they left the room. And so we have gone, line by line for the things that they requested in front of CPS and to CPS before speaking with me in the room. Obviously this, issue with the anti-seizure medication. And there's so many. I'm trying not to overwhelm the podcast with all the little details, but, just so you can really see how CPS actually played part of the chess. And so they're telling me that we're not in compliance, and I'm getting upset because I said, I made the resident go back and check multiple times about the diuretic of our choice. We agreed to the PICC line. We agreed to the Keppra, which I have stated to you. We weren't against the seizure medication. We were trying to see if there was one that was going to be less risk to her kidneys. And they're saying, well, the doctors have said you're out of compliance. So your hearing is at 1:00, to remove Autumn from our care. So trying to find a lawyer at that point was nearly impossible. And we did get connected with a few through Remnant.
Is that what they call it? They call it remove Autumn from your care?
So they called it it was a minute order. And it would be to place Autumn in the care of, it wasn't the foster system, but it was like a medical foster provider.
Is that temporary or is that permanent?
It depends on the case, that's why we were like, we don't even know what kind of lawyer to get. And so we had a few different lawyers. We had one that was in state in San Diego, so not by us. And then we had someone that was out of state. Willing to be on the call with us. We had, doctors and nurses from Remnant. And we have not received any documentation. CPS says, we'll text you the Zoom link for the hearing. So we don't even have any documents. And I'm saying, we are in compliance. Like, I want to speak to the doctor. So I go into the hallway and I'm saying, I want to speak to the doctors. Where are they? They're saying we're not in compliance, and we are. And I said to CPS, her medical record will prove otherwise. We have consented to everything. And so they said, okay, we're going to call the doctors. They reached back out and they said, well, you're still not in compliance. And I'm saying, where are the doctors then? What are we not in compliance about? You need to call them again. You need to speak with the doctors again. So they call something like maybe an hour or two before the hearing at most. And they say, you're in compliance, but there will still be a hearing. So at this point, we really don't know what they even have, what is going on here. And so we go into this hearing, and we are told that that a lawyer who would represent us has to have a special training for, I'm losing the title that they had for it. Oh, dependence court. So they have to have dependence court courses in order to represent us, which neither of these lawyers has. I later found out through the home healthcare doctor he is actually a lawyer himself, who he just represents his practice. He defends his practice. But that is not true. That actually only the judge needs to have that training completed. Right. But we're told that these lawyers can't represent us, and that one will be assigned to us. Now, even the lawyer who was assigned to us has not received all of the paperwork. So she doesn't really know what's going on. And she's saying this is a due process violation, which is a civil rights issue. Mm-hmm. So she has had some papers sent to her, which she is trying to read to us in a breakout session that we were given a few minutes with her regarding. And, she says, like, I am sure that you have learned more about this syndrome and these medications than you wish to, and that you are trying to, protect your daughter in the ways that you see fit. Not necessarily saying that she sees our point. We didn't even really get to talk about that. Right. But she goes into this hearing saying that due process was denied, and they overruled that, which I don't think that's allowed. They acknowledge it. The judge even says, I'm aware that due process has been denied to these parents. And that's one of the interesting things that I can get into even more, because you and I talked a little bit about, how these court cases are actually traded on the stock market, and there's a lot of other factors. There's a lot of trafficking that's actually happening. And so I'm sort of confused, because if we're being denied due process and we're in compliance, then what are we here for? And I am looking out at Autumn, sedated, and clearly she is hallucinating. She has wrist restraints on. She's crying. And I'm sitting in the bathroom. My husband is sitting in the room with my toddler, also on Zoom, because we have to show up separately. We can't be on the same device. And so they proceed to read through what they send us at the moment of the hearing, their outline of the order of events. Now, later, after this first hearing, I actually created a 10-page document to their 3 to 5 page minute order of corrections and objections, because there are blatant lies, which I believe I may have gotten into in our first discussion about, trying to say that we were requesting to leave her soiled when we were simply asking if we could not use cold wipes with the diaper changes, with the urine diaper changes on disposable diapers, which are absorbent, because she would thrash. And so, some of these things were ways that we wanted to avoid distress. But additionally, there was a letter in there from the head of the ethics committee, which I believe I may have also shared, that this, doctor has said that she hasn't said it outright, but she is implying that she has been in contact with our family and seen our daughter, which she has never, which is reflected also in the medical record. She's nowhere present. There are no medical notes from her visiting the hospital room. And my husband had looked up her LinkedIn, and her byline says, I help doctors write compelling stories. So clearly a lot of what they're trying to do is paint us a certain way to deem us unfit to be able to, cover their mistakes and their malpractice, and really their experimentation on Autumn. But I think one of the sickest parts too, is that a lot of what took place in the hearing was as though these people were medical professionals when none of them are. So none of them know what any of these medications mean. Right. And so I have two CPS workers that I can see that as they're reading these things against us, which they have blatantly lied about. One of them, an example being that was recorded, was that that was in the document in the minute order, was an accusation that we had requested to record the CPS meeting with the doctors, and that was denied. And yet we had someone sitting in the room recording anyway. That was the person who came to pray for Autumn. They did not record. And I even followed up to say, were you recording? And they weren't. Yeah. Because I actually think that might have served us somewhere down the road if they had seen all the things that we were agreeing in compliance to. But these women are smiling as these things are being read against us, which is, it haunts me. It really haunts me. And they are very young. They're social workers. So I'm sure that they see some, things that are horrible, just like my husband has in law enforcement, but that I doubt that they have children of their own. Otherwise, there is no way that they would sit there and smile, Mm-hmm. So at some point, my husband interrupts and says that we have agreed to all these medications that are being read in the minute order. And so, what exactly are we doing here? Because they're still kind of protesting that Autumn is not safe in our care. At which point I say, you all are in discussion about the Lasix, or Bumex, which I eventually consented to, being told it was, equivalent, and it's 40 to 50 times more potent, which I think I shared the first time we spoke. Yep. And I found that out later. It's not approved for pediatric use. But that no one here seems to have asked why we wouldn't want to administer that medication. And that the fact is that it carries a risk of kidney damage and kidney failure. Mm-hmm. And that I am advocating for these slower acting, maybe lower risk diuretics, not as forceful diuretics, so that we can preserve some of Autumn's kidney function. Now, at that point, I do feel like all of a sudden I was being talked to with a little bit more respect within this hearing, because none of these people have a background in medicine. No. And so, right. And they have not asked why. Why would these parents refuse, right? They're trying to paint me as the lady who wants to keep her daughter sitting in a soiled diaper and doesn't want medication. Right. And so, they get to a place where she says, she has already admitted that we were denied due process, but she's keeping this hearing going. And the judge actually says, I spoke to my mentor about this before the hearing. So she had already made a decision before the hearing proceeded, which is also illegal. Right. Yep. And he said, what I should do is issue a sua sponte, which is where, they can override our consent. And she said it would be if the hospital can override our consent if it was deemed a life-threatening or a life-saving measure. So like I shared with you, that could be Tylenol. But then we really feel like we have almost lost Autumn. Right now, it's not someone else managing her care because they can't take her away from us. But it is, and scarily, it would have been one of those social workers who's smiling, right? Potentially. So, and they say that there's going to be a hearing in 2 weeks. And if we have not consented to something that's a life-saving measure, that they will proceed. So they will proceed further with removing Autumn from our care. So really, our hands are very much tied.
So go ahead. Just to recap, they knew you were in compliance. They had the hearing anyway. Yeah. Your lawyer said that you were denied due process. They overruled that. And then they basically just continued the process regardless, even though you shouldn't have been there anyways, because they actually deemed that you were actually in compliance.
Yes.
And then you have a hearing 2 weeks later to ensure that you were
Right.
still in compliance, right?
Yes. Yeah.
I don't mean to cut you off, Hope. It's just, I think everybody's been through this to some degree, in not what you're going through, right?
Yeah.
But it is something I've said, and I remember being an intern. No, I was not an intern at the WHO, but I had friends that were interns at the WHO as chiropractors. So it was kind of a big deal because it was like, oh, you got into the WHO and you're a chiropractor, right? And it was this thing, right? And I remember getting to a debate with the staff chiropractor there who wasn't even actually doing anything holistic. And I just said, the problem with these conversations is that nobody really recognizes that the entire system, right? The entire system of conventional medicine actually is dehumanistic by matter of existence. A diagnosis, they don't talk about the amazing, beautiful girl struggling for her life in the room and the parents that are just totally 100% advocating for her in that dynamic. They talk about the unfit parents and the diagnosis in room 6. And these parents are obviously belligerent. And so therefore, like this whole system exists to reinforce that original, like it's one
narrative,
on the nice end, it's a faulty premise. On the worst end, it is a form of trafficking that is literally a possibility every time you go to the hospital, right? And this is something that I want to share because ever since I've just had more of these conversations in my community, in my practice, the nurses that are in my practice, there are people who are nurses in our practice that work at the local hospitals, don't want to name any of those types of things, want to keep it all private. But they say that if you actually, say deny vaccines, right? Like that there's almost like a button. It's not actually a button, but it's an investigate this family button that happens immediately. And like some of the people on our side, they're like, when we heard it, like some of my friends, they couldn't sleep at night. And I was like, y'all, like, this is what I've been talking about for so long, because you didn't think it was going to be you. Autumn didn't think it was going to be her. No. You think you're going to a hospital that you actually worked in, that you might have a little bit of rapport. You don't want special treatment, but you want to be treated like a human. You want to be treated like a loving mother. Right. And what happens is the 180-degree experience, but it's actually just very much in alignment with the system. Right. And that system has no state boundaries, has no county boundaries. Right. It's literally something that could happen on a day-to-day basis. And at this point, when you go into that hearing, remnant's not there.
Well, so that first hearing, I did have Gail on, okay, cool. But they wouldn't let anyone speak. That's something else that I haven't gotten into, is so that they could listen, but they would not let anyone speak. Okay. And they also said that nobody could have a social media platform, because I think that they had taken, during our little breakout session, they were trying to see, like, can this be, how would this be publicized potentially? So one of the lawyers from another state did have a large social media platform, so he was not allowed to continue. And so we had this one lawyer from San Diego. We had some of the doctors and nurses, but they weren't allowed to speak on our behalf. Although Gail did speak up. She said, at one point, this little girl was throwing up blood. This mother is, protecting her child from further harm. So yes, go ahead.
But that was a distinguishing factor, that you could not have anybody there to witness or, advocate for you that had any sort of platform. That right. To me makes
these things are made up, right? Yeah, so I think gotcha. Because I also think this judge was very young. I doubt she even had children of her own. I don't think anyone in that hearing did. And so I think that they were going to come up with whatever they could to try to get this still in alignment with the idea that we were somehow unfit, that they were on the same page with Lucille Packard, that they were very similar to when we arrived. And I told you that there was like this thrill that it's like the case study of the week and this rare syndrome, and they're going to turn it into this experimental thing. That also CPS is the same way, right? Like, ooh, these, these parents that are, they're wackos and, they're just denying treatment, and which is obviously not the case. Like, we went to urgent care twice, then we went to the local emergency room. So, we were taking her condition seriously, but that's not how they wanted to paint us. And even in terms of due process, our lawyer received some of the paperwork during the hearing, not just right before we actually began, but during the hearing, she's being emailed. And I didn't receive all of the paperwork until after our hearing. So after they've already issued this sua sponte, the court ruling. And so those are legal practices. And since then, we have requested the court transcript and we have been denied every time. And I believe that's because the judge says that due process was denied. She literally says that. And she also says that her decision was made prior by saying, I spoke with my mentor and he said I should do this. So we were supposed to have another hearing 2 weeks later. Now I think that they're playing games with us because it was supposed to be at like 8 a.m. And the day before, we're frantically trying to work with this lawyer from San Diego who can't represent us. He has multiple times at that point, we're told he can't represent us because he doesn't have this course. He's tried many, many times to reach out to the organization that puts on this course. But what you have to do is you give them your email and they reach out to you, which they never would. They would never reach out to him, which I very much believe is intentional. So he has no idea how to make this happen. But he is calling he's calling CPS and the county attorney. And he is telling them all the ways that malpractice has occurred for Autumn. And at some point before the close of day, the day before our second hearing, we're still in compliance, which is, unfortunate because at that point, it's 2 weeks later, we've consented to so many things. But they did cancel the hearing. And she says at the end of that hearing, she says, I hope I don't see you again, the judge. And so I don't necessarily know if that's true, but if it is true, I think it's because what she did was illegal. Yeah. And not because she hoped the best for my daughter.
So many people have asked me what I do to stay mentally and physically resilient in the midst of the unending polarization, fear, and tyranny. Literally nothing has made a bigger impact for me than daily cold plunging. 3 minutes, 37 degrees every morning for over a year now. My friends, I wanted to tell you about the Edge Tub from Edge Theory Labs. Their portable and inflatable tub can alternate between an ice bath and hot tub. I've been regenerating the benefits of cold plunging every day, like better sleep, better focus, and more energy. We have had some really amazing interviews to learn more about cold exposure. But in the meantime, I invite you to check out Edge Theory Labs' website to learn more. I'm also happy to share an exclusive offer for Future Generations podcast listeners, $150 off using the code TheFutureGen. You can find more info in the show notes. Get cold. What's up, FG fam? One of the single best companies whose products have supported the optimal wellness of our family for years is Earthly Wellness. Kate TG and her team have stood for truth, health, and freedom in ways that paved the way for so many of us. They experienced heavy levels of censorship long before it was popularized, and they stood strong and persevered. Their products are clean, cost-effective, and honestly, they work for all ages. From supporting my wife, our oldest, and our little guy, Earthly Wellness provides products that have been foundational for our family for years. We especially use their products right before bedtime. Their Feel Better Fast and other herbal tinctures are some of the best in the world, as well as their amazing Goodnight Lotion, the magnesium oil, are mainstays. I am so excited to be partnering with Earthly to offer Future Generations podcast listeners 10% off your first purchase. You can find the code link in the show notes. Enjoy the rest of the show. Love and appreciate you all. I imagine retelling this story opens up, pretty raw wounds, and I appreciate you doing that. And I do want to ask you a question that might be a little bit maybe too sensitive, but in hindsight, is there anything that you feel like you could have done differently, or should this ever happen? Or if you could tell parents, given what you have expressed so far, like here are some things that I think I would do differently.
Yeah. It is very nuanced, so I will try and keep it
of course,
somewhat concise. Mm-hmm. I have stated from the get-go, and on every podcast, every journal article, I have talked about how our family has been through so much. And I do believe that when you understand psychoneuroimmunology, that the psyche, the nervous system, and the immune system they are always in communication. We are one being. They are not separate. Our family has really no support system going through the fires. I think I shared with you last time, the reason we wound up at the emergency room, I truly do believe, was in part to the fact that none of us were getting any sleep. Autumn was up every 20 minutes. And my husband and I were exhausted. We had a newborn. And at the time, my toddler was maybe 18 months. So he is cutting toddler molars. And so he's up too. So I have a newborn, I have a, 18-month-old, and I have a 4-year-old who's up every 20 minutes, just turned 4. And so we were exhausted. And I really think our nervous systems were fried. I think Autumn moves into hyper arousal likely when she's afraid, right? She has literally fled from a fire. And not to get, too into the graphics of that, but there was a time during the fires where we had nowhere to go. We have 2 dogs. There was no one taking dogs. At that point, we were the last area to be evacuated. Everything was full. I'm calling people in the middle of the night. It's COVID. A lot of the people that we knew during COVID that had stayed in California and hadn't moved to another state were not comfortable taking us in, which is really sad. Wow. And we are fleeing on Highway 1 as trees on fire are rolling across the highway. This is something my child has lived through. Yeah. Then the weeks of different temporary housing, the months of we've lost everything. Technically, we were able to sell the structure of the home, which, some people tried to do rebuilds, but we got forced into this fixer-upper. Yeah. We're living in an RV. It is so intense for so long. And we don't have extended family. We don't have a village. And so I think that Autumn's system moves very easily. I talked about the constipation at the beginning of our first podcast together as her digestive system her constitution has been sensitive for a long time. And I remember reading German New Medicine when this was kind of all going on about some of these emotional factors, these conflicts, these internal conflicts that you can suffer from that could be contributing to what's happening for Autumn. And one of them that I thought was very fascinating was about the kidney collecting tubules, that it is often feeling like a fish out of water when someone loses their tribe, when they feel as though, and they kind of describe it how a fish closes up its system when it gets into an environment with just oxygen and not with water. Feeling like I don't have a pack or something like that. And I don't think that Autumn was able to get tended to the way that if she had grandmas and aunties and people that were supporting our family while someone is sick, would maybe feel more grounded in, right? She has these new siblings, we have gone through so much in her little time on the planet. People have their faces covered during that time. We had nowhere to go. And really Autumn and I, while my husband did work during COVID, we were, in solitary confinement in that RV, and the same in some of those temporary housing situations. I remember, and not to get too off track, but I remember when the fires were raging and we wound up in San Francisco, which is the opposite of the mountains where we live. But we found a temporary housing situation that would allow dogs, which our dogs are also neurotic in that environment, from ambulances, fire trucks, all kinds of things. And I remember Autumn being outside with me because I just wanted to step out of that small cramped space, and her pulling my mask down, and she's looking at my face for reassurance, and someone screams "murderer." So they have no idea.
Because the mask was down?
Because the mask was down, right? And so, she this is such a strange world for such a small little child, right? Who from the get-go, our children need stability and security, and their nervous system is completely open. And so I do feel if I could have had more resources, and not saying what would I do differently? Because I was man, I
understand. I understand completely.
Right. But we need a village. When I was on the panel at the Next Steps conference, Gil from Pure Blood Registry talked about how he would not bring his child to the emergency room if they maybe broke a limb or something like that, because he actually knows a doctor down the street, right? He has set himself up where he feels comfortable having the connections that he needs outside of a hospital setting. And we didn't really have that. And, the few people I did know that were doing some work that I'm grateful to, that I feel like I was able to reach out to and connect with to get some resources once we were already in the hospital, they're already very, they're so worn thin, right? They're worn very thin. And some of this goes back to even the masculine and feminine dynamics that are happening in our world today, where women, I need other women. And it is hard to make a single income work. I am home with my children. That has been challenging for us, because certainly the fires put us under a lot of financial pressure too, but if I'd had other women, even in my community, that were able to stay at home, that weren't, at the demands of a job at the time, who could have shown up for us, and been a resource to us, to be able to have the feminine support that women lived off of for centuries, to be able to meet the needs of tending to my children, when no woman can tend to 3 children 24 hours a day, up at all hours, and really get her daughter's nervous system to feel supported, to really be there. That's what she needed, was, I know from the get-go, safety and security. Now, most people assume I've been on podcasts and I never really speak back to it, but I am actually a nutritional therapy practitioner, which you mentioned in the intro. So I did actually try all of the things that people say I could have done, which I don't correct people. I did try probiotics. I did try slippery elm. I was doing a lot. I was doing, it used to be called Restore, but now I think it's called Ion Biome, to help with the intestinal integrity and permeability, right? So yeah, I'm sharing all this, and you know it.
No, I understand.
So I was doing a lot of those things that people might assume we missed one, right? If only we had seen you sooner, we could have avoided, right? But I truly believe in, and people are going to say, oh, this is because you're a therapist, but no, I'm also a nutritionist, but I do believe in the psychoneuroimmunology and the co-regulation that really needed to happen for Autumn's system, because her brother has been through a lot less in his little life. Now, I did grow him in some of that temporary housing situation. He's been through plenty too. But the fact that he had it and he was a little bit sturdier and it didn't impact him in the same way at all. I shared with you. He just had diarrhea a few times for a few days. He was fine. He was playing. He was not looking at me and saying somebody help me, please help me, mama.
Yeah.
And to be able to be calm, to be rested, for her to feel into my nervous system and to know she is safe, she's okay. Right. I don't think we had that. We really needed the village and the resources that we did have. I also think, just from an attachment perspective, I think that the dual income society we live in is a high demand, but also I don't think we realize how much children really bond and attach. And when I say that Autumn was reading the room, it really was like who's showing up for us? Like, we have since, hired a mother's helper, and she is exceptional. But when I was searching, because my own health declined after we got Autumn home from the hospital, to go through all this. And again, I'm coming from that German new medicine lens, but a profound loss conflict. I wound up with a very, very intense ovarian cyst situation, which makes sense, right? My body thought I was going to lose a child, maybe needs to make another one. And so the profound loss of like not having support. I sought that out because I want a different paradigm for Autumn. I want her not only to know, if we seek justice, that I didn't let it be okay, but I want her to know that actually, like, people show up for us. There are people who want to help. When we need support, people are there, because, that is something that is so lacking in society today. Many people want to push that children are resilient. Children are adaptable, but I do not think that they are necessarily resilient, that this will impact Autumn. And so it needs to be just a complete makeover of lifestyle outside of these systems.
I think it's every single thing that you've said, especially in that last part, is something that our family has experienced alone. Like exactly the same, in a sense that no fire, right? But there's different types of fires in the world,
right.
And I would say that, the whole concept of just feeling alone and isolated and feeling not supported and feeling unsafe and feeling, in a way, just trying to navigate the things, as they pile up, as they amplify in their intensity and their urgency. That co-regulation piece is actually just impossible, and I would say, what a lot of people don't recognize, that, I appreciate you sharing all the things that you do know, because I think people do need to know that, because we live in it was already a very judgmental parenting world, right? Where you make a decision and then all of a sudden there's 50 other suggestions, not thinking that you've already done the critical thinking for your own child, especially when you have a background, right? But what most people don't know, and this is me being very biased through my lens, is that if you don't understand the nervous system, and if you don't understand the sensory experience that a child goes through, especially when they've been through what they've been through, like Autumn has, then you might throw out a phrase like, oh, kids are resilient. They just bounce. It's no big deal. They're going to be fine. And it's like, fine is a very broad term. It could be, very much from the outside looking in, fine. Right. And then, as you heard in the last interview, my child was not fine. It's like, and I'm home, like I'm literally in our home, and it's like you have spoken to my heart, because this could very likely be my kid,
right?
Very likely, not even out of the realm of possibility, but my kid has been through versions of what your child has been through. My family has been through versions of what your family has been through, and I avoid at all costs these types of measures. However, I also know you never know, right? You never know when you might be in this type of situation. So I appreciate you sharing a lot of that, because in the end, in every case, the good and the bad, it is a conscious understanding, cognitive understanding for me to know that it's providential. But it's also like this guttural experience to force myself to know and believe that it's providential. And the things that you're also expressing about German new medicine and about these different paradigms of healthcare and all these different ways to strategize for your child and your family, child given what she's been through, but also for your family given on what you could be going through in the future, and preparing yourself to do things differently, to see things differently, to feel and co-regulate differently. I applaud you for being brave and willing to see those, right? I think it's because who you are, right? It's one thing to be a nutritional therapy practitioner. Love the NTA, right? By the way, It's another thing to be a therapist and to understand that mind-body dynamic, the psychoneuroimmunology. If anybody has not heard that term before, then you are largely missing the big picture as to why we are doing what we are doing right now. A lot of my training comes through Stephen Porges and the polyvagal theory, and understanding that the social regulation of children, the feeling of safety. I feel guilty for putting my family in different avenues of risk because of the truth and because of our platform and because of who we have been and become as leaders in this community. However, and I used to say very maybe egotistically saying, but at least they're free, you know? And then also you're just like, but what if my child doesn't feel free? Like in her heart, what if she doesn't feel free in her own, in her family, in her own safety of her own home?
Right.
And those things I lose sleep over with. And I would continually invite you to keep going and keep studying and keep finding those solutions, because there are many canaries in many coal mines today. And I believe you are bringing to light one that many of us have right here in the back of our minds, that many of us are starting to put front and center.
Yeah.
And then many of us are not doing the work to put in those preventative, preemptive strategies to safeguard our families in that way, right? Because we don't know when there's a broken arm, and we don't have the random doc down the street that's going to set a radius or something like that. And maybe that's what we should be doing, and maybe that's what we should be looking for, and those types of things. But we also just need to recognize that you've provided so much pragmatic, practical, very actionable solutions for families today, because unfortunately you've had to live through it and you've had to figure them out on your own. And I believe that you are hopefully, turning some of those corners that just help you and Autumn just find that peace and find that space where you can actually remember what that resiliency is, right? Because I do believe that children are resilient. I do believe that children are adaptive. I also know that the level of trauma that has been wielded on our society today, where somebody can literally yell at a murderer, for just their daughter pulling down a mask. Like, we all know, and we're all feeling it, right? Because it's an election year. There's all these weird divisive things, and we can see all the chess pieces coming into play, and you're like, wow, the dog and pony show is back. And are we ready? Are we ready in our hearts? Are we ready in our minds? Are we physically actually ready? And I think even just that last share about German New Medicine is a big, big opportunity to find that home, right?
Yeah. And, I will be very short, but I was, and not to get, too graphic again, but I was experiencing so much bleeding from my own health issue that I actually went back to the emergency room. I didn't go to Lucille Packard, but I had my newborn, and it took 7 hours to get an ultrasound. Now, at that point, I thought, well, maybe I'm having an ectopic pregnancy or something. Anyway, the ultrasound came back, inconclusive, but they're telling me they want to do exploratory surgery, and they won't let me leave. So they're saying, right? They're saying to me, so I want you to repeat back what we're saying. And I was like, what? And they said, I want you to repeat back what we're saying, like what the concerns are. And I said, well, I want you to listen. First of all, you have a C- health grade score. If I'm going to do exploratory surgery, it's going to be with a vetted professional that I have an established relationship with. Second of all, you want to do surgery based on an ultrasound that was inconclusive. They told me that by the time they could track someone down to read it, it wasn't a diagnostic radiologist. It was just somebody who understands radiology somehow. And their recommendation was to get another ultrasound. So then they're asking if they can call my husband. to drive me to a different emergency room if I don't want to do exploratory surgery there. So as though I'm not able to make my own decisions. It was very amazing. It really did remind me, it hit home about when I was contacting organizations like Protocol Kills, and they were saying, we don't work with children, we don't work with elderly. And I was like, well, then someone needs to be assertive. They need to grow a spine. Like I need help because CPS is involved, or, with elderly, with adult protective services. But I actually witnessed like firsthand, like, here I am again. Like, did I need this lesson again? Right. Like, cause I shared with you, like I've free birthed, 2 of my children. This is not an environment that I find, some sort of affirmation of the model in even. And so, but here I am having to really, really trust in my own intuitive sense about what is happening with my body. And I do not think that it is and I actually saw even a chiropractor, he's also a kinesiologist. And he said to me, this was, I believe, right before I went to the emergency room, but he said to me, I can keep doing body work on you, but I think you need to hire some help. And it is not a coincidence that when I hired this exceptional mother's helper, that someone very grounded, someone older, I said, I had no college students. I wanted someone who really understood trauma, that my bleeding stopped, and my body got better. I stopped having pain. And so this, stabbing pain, completely ceased when I had the support that I needed, and that my body has continued to get better. Now I've done some of the herbal things and all of that, but that support, that co-regulation, that paradigm that I wanted for Autumn, that people show up for us, that people want to help, that they're helpers, that is profoundly healing. So that's not just the therapist in me who, knows all of the things about the mirror neurons and all of that, but that was something that I then lived myself, that I saw it in Autumn, that I saw it and I couldn't act on it. And then it came alive for me, and I said, not this time, right? Yeah. I'm not going down this road again. I have the chance to not commit self-betrayal to myself. And that is going to be a part of that paradigm shift for all of my children to see that I walked it, right?
It will sit with me, and I think it warrants, maybe a separate conversation, but it will sit with me that the families that you were able to build bridges with and connections with and community with during COVID didn't take you in. That will sit with me, because I think we've experienced similar things in our own community, and it's.
I was saying, like, I have a baby. I'm going to be sleeping in my car with my baby. And, I later found out maybe some health concerns and things that they had on their end from these people. But that it was that fear will drive people so far that they will really abandon the most important thing, right?
Which is a fear of getting sick.
Yes, of COVID. Yes, that they just weren't comfortable. So
people that showed up for you all and created community because of COVID were also not taking you in because of COVID.
Well, no, they weren't. Those people, most of the people that we felt like we established community with, like, they left. They left California. And so now we have built community after the fact. It's now, it's after the hospital, after the fires.
Okay, gotcha.
That's when it became like, it has to happen. Like, I can't keep going. Like, my body can't keep going because look at what, like, our health is taking a toll, right? That I was already saying when we were living it, like,
I hired the most amazing, she's a former patient, the most amazing life coach that I would say saved my family and saved my life, in many respects. And she had to talk me down one day, and she just said, unfortunately, and she was kind of being more authentic and vulnerable with her own kind of understanding of how she's had to navigate things. And she's like, this world is we're so divided, and we're so isolated, and we're so like just, compartmentalized, like everybody is everywhere and nobody has that tribe to the degree that humans are tribal. And we need that. Yeah. She's like, I've had to spend and invest more money for things that were inherent and free to ancestral people that, and it just, for me, it dropped me into like reality where I was like, oh shit, like that's what I've been doing. And I've been fighting it because I've been wanting the thing in the version that we're made to, whether it's grandparents, whether it's, family, whether it's blood family, all the things that we largely could have, but don't. And so therefore I've invested in that support and thinking that at some point that family is going to come back. And she's just like, you need to try on the fact that the world is the way it is now.
Yeah.
And this is an investment that we just have to make to build in that co-regulation, that support, that if you didn't do, where would you be? And what and how can you strategize knowing that this is just a reality at this point?
Right. Because it's so hard when it comes to our physiology, right? Like what is our physiology built for versus the way that we live? Like you think about postpartum doulas, like that's what all grandmas and aunts and sisters were, and so it's so lacking. And so now there has to be so much preparation and investment in those things to make sure that we are able to show up the way that we want to, because it wasn't there. It wasn't there for us when we needed it most. And I think that a lot of people now want to put those things in place proactively, whereas there were just ways that we found to take it for granted or to say that we could get by, because we do live in a very hyper individualistic society. Even the model of codependency, which if you really understand it, is there are things that are unhealthy about codependency, but even the model of codependency is actually kind of along with some of those more feminist propaganda of how they think the world should operate versus how humans thrive.
How we just do, right?
Yeah.
Hope, I just wanted to say thank you. I think it's a small dream of mine that I would say not everybody that I interview, but there are some special people that I interview that I just dream that it's a neighbor, and somebody that we can walk and we can share things and we can, be in community. And I think just the nature of like the fires that you've been through and the fires that my family has been through are just so very synonymous. And I feel like there's if there's at any point anything that you need, I just want you to know that you can always reach out to me, that we're connected. And I don't know how I could ever help. I don't know what it is that I could leverage, but Autumn's story, your story, could very likely be my wife and my daughter's and ours. And we would likely be in a very similar situation in so many aspects of how you shared things that at the end, I feel tender, I feel raw, but I also know that I feel way more empowered than I did before meeting you, before hearing your story, and before you sharing with us and our community. I had my team listen to this interview, the first part, because I wanted to know where I left off, and I needed to know how to pick up in the right way, and also honor you guys. And it was one of those moments for my team to just kind of jaw drop. I can't believe this. And I will share with you that some are parents and some are not. Yeah. And it's something that's really important, because I see that every day. We see it every day. Lawmakers that are passing laws about children that don't have any children, doctors that are, forcing things into children that don't have children, CPS people that are obviously dehumanizing moms and kids, and they don't have children. And I would say we've all been children. We've all been born. We've all, had that mother that's made us in their womb. And we all have that, in our makeup. And your story just melted our hearts in so many ways. And I just want you to know that you guys are going to be in our prayers. You guys are going to be in our thoughts. And if there's anything that we could do at future generations for you and your family, just let us know.
Thank you. Yeah, I do want to, say that people surprise you in how they can help. So that does mean a lot. I reached out to so many people, and all of those roads led to Autumn being home.
I love that.
Whereas I don't know that she would be if it hadn't been for the people that I randomly said, can you help? And some of these people, like Gail, I had never met before. I met her 6 months after the fact. So, so I'm very grateful for that.
For those of you who don't have your hearts wide open right now, stop listening to my podcast and just hit unsubscribe. You are not human. And for those of you that do, just take a moment of silence and just be very much in the highest level of your intention and prayer for this amazing family, for being brave, for stepping into the fray, and for starting the process of creating a real model to protect families like ours as we navigate the treacherous waters of these crazy things that are going on. Yeah. And I can't thank you enough.
Yeah, thank you so much.
As you probably know, I'm the clinic director of the Future Generations Clinic of Chiropractic. I wanted to invite those of you in the greater San Diego area to come check us out. We expect and experience miracles in our office every day and would love for you to experience the same, as well as your family, especially your kids. This month, we're offering our new patient package for just $67 for podcast listeners. The offer retails at $349 and includes an in-depth consultation where our patients literally tell us we know more about their family's health in the first 15 minutes than virtually every doctor on their healthcare team combined. Our state-of-the-art clinical workup, including insight nervous system scans, full spine digital x-rays, and a functional exam. We also include a full report of your results, a customized plan to realize your greatest health potential, as well as your first adjustment in our office. Check out the link in the show notes for all the details and claim the offer. Love and appreciate you all.